Anytime someone goes missing, we are always hopeful that they will safely return home. However, this is not always the case. So sit down, grab yourself a mocha, as we go through 10 missing person cases that may never be solved. On a summer evening in June 1983, 15-year-old Emanuela Orlandi disappeared from Vatican City in central Rome after attending a routine music lesson. The daughter of a prominent Vatican employee, Orlandi enjoyed the religious center's gardens and often ran into Pope John Paul II. Her brother, Pietro, recalled their city being more of a village inhabited by a close-knit group of around 6 families. But Orlandi's disappearance on June 22nd of that year launched decades of conspiracy theories. On the last day anyone saw her, Orlandi called her sister after her music class to tell her that a representative from Avon Cosmetics had offered her a job. When Orlandi failed to return home the following day, her parents called the teacher from her class and the police. Her mysterious disappearance was declared a missing person case that day. A witness initially reported seeing a girl matching Orlandi's description entering a green BMW near the music school on the night of her disappearance, but that bit of information would lead nowhere. Shortly after this detail surfaced, the Orlandis received an ominous phone call promising to return the girl if the Vatican released Mehmet Ali Akkar, a Turkish national who was languishing in prison for having attempted to assassinate the Pope 2 years earlier. Unfortunately, that development proved fruitless as well. It has since been suggested that the Rome-based crime syndicate Banda della Magliana kidnapped Orlandi to force the Vatican to pay them back for an outstanding loan. The girlfriend of the leader of that criminal organization, Enrico De Pedis, later claimed that De Pedis told her that Orlandi was indeed kidnapped and killed. The most hair-raising theories, however, claim that the Vatican, local police, and high-profile lawmakers kidnapped Orlandi and forced her into sexual servitude. At least this is what the Vatican's chief exorcist, Father Gabriel Amorth, believes. Amorth was appointed by Pope John Paul II himself. This was a crime with a sexual motive. Parties were organised with the Vatican gendarme acting as the recruiter of the girls. The network involved diplomatic personnel from a foreign embassy to the Holy See. I believe Emanuela ended up as a victim of this circle. In 2019, a promising tip suggested that Orlandi had been buried in a Vatican tomb. Tragically, this tip too yielded no results. Her family has organised demonstrations in recent years, hoping to spur a renewed investigation into her unsolved disappearance, but to no avail. Tara Calico left her home in Valencia County, New Mexico for her daily bike ride. The 19-year-old was never seen by her loved ones in the flesh again. Investigators have been baffled ever since. As she headed out the door the morning of her mysterious disappearance, Calico jokingly told her mother, Patty Dole, that she'd better come find her if she didn't get home by noon. The young woman had a tennis date with her boyfriend at 12:30 p.m. and told her mother that she was determined to be back by then. When noon came and went, Calico's mother drove up and down her usual bike route to look for her, but to no avail. Her mother then contacted the police, but a subsequent search party yielded few clues. Pieces of Calico's Walkman and cassette tape were found on her route, but police were convinced that these had been broken by Tara on purpose to lead the police to her. Then her missing persons case went cold for the next 9 months. Authorities began to ask questions about Calico's parents and home life. They tried to find out if there were reasons for her mysterious disappearance, such as abuse. Police found nothing but 2 distressed parents who loved their daughter dearly and wanted nothing more than for her to be found safely. On June 15, 1989, authorities found a Polaroid in a convenience store parking lot 1,500 miles away. It showed a teenage girl starkly resembling Calico and a young boy, both lying on sheets and a pillow tied up with duct tape over their mouths. Calico's mother felt certain that this was her daughter. The girl in the photograph had the same scar on her thigh as Calico. While the FBI remained skeptical, experts at Scotland Yard in the UK agreed with her mother's assessment. Calico's mysterious disappearance took yet another distressing turn when the Henley family came forward to claim the young boy in the photo was their son. Michael Henley's remains have been found in the Zuni Mountains in 1990. However, it's likely that he died of hypothermia after wandering away from his family's campsite. Sheriff Reen Rivera of Valencia County suggested a rational explanation for the missing person case in 2008. He said he received information that Calico was killed in a car accident while riding her bike. After being hit, Rivera said that a teenage driver disposed of the body in fear. However, no arrests followed this claim. Tara Calico has never been found. Branson Perry disappeared from his father's Skidmore, Missouri home on April 11, 2001. But the 20-year-old wasn't alone when it happened. His friend, Jenna Crawford, had visited to help him clean the house before Perry's father returned from a stay at the hospital. Crawford claimed that Perry walked outside and shouted up to her through the window that he was just returning some jumper cables to the shed by the house. Two men, meanwhile, were working within eyesight on fixing his father's car. Despite these numerous witnesses, Perry still vanished moments later. Perry was working with a traveling petting zoo at the time of his mysterious disappearance and suffered from tachycardia, a condition that made his heart race. He was living at home with his father. On April 7th, a few days before he vanished, Perry visited his neighbor, Jason Bierman, who purportedly doused him with an unidentified drug. According to true crime expert Diane Fanning, Perry then stripped naked and danced before shaving off his pubic hair and engaging in sexual activity with Bierman. Once Perry sobered up, he became humiliated and told his father everything. The father became enraged with Bierman, but no confrontation occurred, and Bierman was never officially named as a suspect in Perry's unsolved disappearance. On the day he vanished, Jenna Crawford simply assumed that Perry had gone elsewhere and went home herself without another thought. Then Perry's grandmother dropped by the following day to an empty home. Thinking Perry had stepped out, she returned the next day too, but to another empty home. She and Perry's parents filed a missing persons report on April 16, 2001. All of Perry's belongings had been left behind, and foul play was suspected. In 2003, the missing person case of Branson Perry took a bizarre turn when a minister and Boy Scouts leader named Jack Wayne Rogers was arrested for unrelated charges. After attempting to perform sex reassignment surgery on a trans woman and failing to stop the bleeding, Rogers was charged with first-degree assault and practicing medicine without a license. But when authorities searched his belongings, they discovered evidence of even more disturbing crimes on his computer, including CP and distressing online posts that described the rape, torture, and murder of multiple men. Rogers even described cannibalizing the severed genitals of some. One of his posts described killing a blonde hitchhiker and burying him in the Ozarks. The description matched Perry's, but Rogers maintained that these posts were simply fictional writing exercises. With a lack of direct evidence, Rogers was cleared as a suspect in Perry's missing persons case. As it stands, investigators are convinced Perry was murdered. Whether local drug gangs or cannibalistic Boy Scouts leaders were involved in this unsolved disappearance remains unclear, and Perry is still considered a missing person to this day. Jennifer Kesse had it all: a loving family, a loyal boyfriend, and a reliable job. So when she disappeared on January 23, 2006, her family knew that something horrible must have happened to her. On the evening before that January day, the 24-year-old from Florida returned home from work and chatted with her family over the phone. She called her boyfriend, Robert Allen, around 10 p.m. and then went to bed. Then, texts and calls to Jennifer went unreturned throughout the following day. Co-workers were surprised that she didn't show up to work. By 11 a.m., her parents drove from Tampa to Orlando to check if she was home. They found her car missing. but everything else seemed normal. Footage was retrieved from her apartment complex surveillance system, which showed an unidentified person dropping off her car at noon on the day of her disappearance. Unfortunately, any distinguishing characteristics of theirs were obscured by the apartment's gate. Journalists covering the case reported the mysterious figure was then the luckiest person of interest ever. In the following frustrating years, police have found her abandoned Chevy Malibu, but not much else. The car yielded a latent print, which was deemed too minuscule to reveal any helpful information. Additionally, none of the valuable items in her car had been taken, which suggested that her unsolved disappearance wasn't instigated by a robbery. Authorities pivoted from a lack of evidence to the acquaintances and friends of her who might know more. Jennifer's boyfriend and brother both investigated one of her ex-boyfriends on their own, but he was quickly ruled out. An older work colleague interested in her was also cleared as a suspect. By this point, investigators had no more clues to follow. Jennifer's credit cards went unused, and her cell phone was turned off. Jennifer, it seemed, had simply vanished into thin air. It has now been 18 years since Jennifer's mysterious disappearance. It was March 24th, 1998, when Amy Lynn Bradley's father saw her peacefully resting on the balcony of their cruise ship cabin. It was barely 5:30 a.m., and the young woman had spent most of the evening at the ship's nightclub. Her father decided to let her sleep. When he came back at 6 a.m., she was gone. The Bradley family had boarded the Caribbean Rhapsody of the Seas cruise ship 4 days earlier. Bound for the Antilles, the first leg was rather uneventful, as all aboard awaited docking in Curacao. Eager to let loose, Amy and her brother Brad partied at the ship's club the evening before. Brad Bradley claimed his sister stayed behind to talk to one of the band members entertaining the crowd. Brad left at 1 a.m. and never saw his sister again. After alerting onboard authorities, the worried family finally received help to search the ship once docked in Curacao. Based on Brad's recollections, the family suspected the crew was involved. Not only had ship officials refused to keep the ship at sea to prevent the young woman's potential kidnappers from escaping, but even refused to page Amy over the PA system. Further confounding was the fact that Amy was a trained lifeguard, which made an accidental fall into the ocean rather unlikely. In addition, Brad noted how the crew in the nightclub had given his sister special attention, which led to the family's fears that she had been trafficked into sexual slavery. Subsequent reports said that she had been seen in Curacao, substained these concerns. In August 1998, someone claimed to have spotted a woman with the exact same tattoos. The following year, a Navy member visiting a local brothel claimed one of its prostitutes identified herself as Amy Lynn Bradley. According to him, she said she wasn't allowed to leave the brothel. Perhaps the most harrowing clue was a 2005 email the Bradley family received, which depicted a woman resembling their daughter lying on a bed in her underwear. While the investigation is ongoing, no leads have cropped up ever since. Jodi was a morning news anchor at KIMT TV, a news station in Mason City, Iowa. On the morning of June 27, 1995, Jodi didn't show up to work. A producer called her and, frazzled, she said that she'd overslept and would be in ASAP. The producer called again later, but she didn't pick up the phone or show up to work that day, so they called the police for a welfare check. They found a bottle of hairspray, a pair of red shoes, and a blow dryer next to Jodi's red Mazda Miata. There were signs of a struggle at the scene, including a bent car key and handprints on the car. In an unexpected twist, private investigator Stephen Ridge later revealed that the red Mazda wasn't even Jodi's car. She planned to buy it but hadn't actually paid for it prior to her disappearance. Neither Jodi nor a suspect was ever found, and to this day we still do not know what exactly happened that morning. With Jodi being well known to the public though, her case became the topic of many rumours. One particular popular one revolves around a budding romance of Jodi's prior to her disappearance. The relationship was allegedly very new, so much so that her friends and family didn't even know about it yet. While Ridge doesn't believe the man she was seeing was involved in her disappearance, he did think it was possible that a frequent viewer or admirer found out about him, or simply that she was dating, and grew jealous, potentially giving them a motive for an abduction. On February 9, 1989, 20-year-old Tiffany Sessions left her home in Gainesville, Florida at 6 p.m. to take a walk. She was never seen or heard from again. It's suspected that Paul Rouse, a convicted rapist and murderer, may be responsible. In 2013, a detective received a box of Paul's personal belongings, including a black notebook. In it were references to Linda Frieda and Elizabeth Foster, two women whose murder he was linked to. The notebook also had a page with the date 2/9/89 and the number 2 written on both sides, which some believe ties him to Tiffany's case, as that was the day that she went missing, and the number 2 could imply that she was his second victim. Unfortunately, detectives didn't link Paul to the case until after his death in 2013. So her body may never be found, and we may never know what happened. On July 16, 1996, Susan Walsh left her apartment complex in Nutley, New Jersey, which she shared with her son. Her estranged husband Mark lived below them. Walsh had left to run errands and make a telephone call at a payphone across the street, leaving her son with Mark. It was the last time that she was ever seen. At the time of her disappearance, she had enrolled in a master's program in English at New York University, which she had halfway completed, while supporting herself and her son by working as a freelance journalist and in various jobs as a stripper. At the time of her disappearance, her friends had become worried that she had relapsed into her drug addiction after having maintained 11 years of sobriety. Police were able to eliminate her ex-husband as a suspect in her disappearance. It was noted later that the page for the entire month of July 1996 was missing from Walsh's calendar in her apartment. Although police have few clues to follow up in their investigation, rumors circulated that Walsh's disappearance might have been connected to the investigative journalism that she had been doing at the time. Susan had penned an in-depth report published in the Village Voice about a strip club ring in which members of the Russian mafia were allegedly forcing young girls into the sex industry. Following this article, Walsh had also explored an underground vampire community in New York City, but the newspaper did not run the story as it felt Walsh's writing on the matter was not objective. Ultimately, police were unable to establish any connection between Walsh's disappearance and her work on either article. At the time, Walsh had also participated in a documentary produced by her friend Jill Morley titled Strip, which detailed women working in the sex industry. Walsh was recorded in a group interview for the film on July 14, 1996, 2 days before her disappearance, during which she made a reference to having a stalker. In a 2006 article in the New York Post, it was noted that Walsh had confided to a former boyfriend that another one of her ex-boyfriends had been stalking her. Additionally, the article stated that her husband Mark had refused to allow police to perform forensic testing in their home. To this day, it is unknown what happened to Susan Walsh. Joan Lawrence disappeared in November 1998 in Muskoka, Ontario. She was reported missing by 57-year-old Alan Marshall, a former limo driver who resided on the Laan Farm with others and had become close with Lawrence. Marshall told police he heard gunshots and saw a backhoe being operated around the time of Lawrence's disappearance. Joan Lawrence began taking in the community's unwanted kittens, eventually amassing dozens of cats. In 1994, her shack burned down in an accidental fire. After that, she lived in boarding houses and the Salvation Army, but continued to feed her cats. In 1997, she moved into Cedar Pines Christian Retirement Lodge, a retirement residence owned by Catherine Laan. Later that year, she moved onto property owned by Catherine's brothers, David, Walter, and Paul Laan. According to community members, the Laan Farm was the only place she could keep her cats. For $600 a month, Lawrence rented an 8x10-foot shed that had limited heat and no insulation or running water. In September 1998, a social worker alerted police to conditions on the Laan Farm. Police and the fire chief attended, discovering Lawrence in the shed. Adult Protective Services was notified and began planning to find Lawrence another home. In the meantime, Lawrence was moved from the shed into a decommissioned van on the same property. Police obtained a search warrant for the property that December. Despite an extensive search by lake, land, and air, they failed to find Lawrence's body. Notably, half a dozen of her cats had been fatally shot, and it was uncovered that she was in the process of reporting her landlords for fraud, theft, mistreatment, and neglect at the time of her disappearance. The police investigation continued, and by July 2000, they had discovered 3 more of Laan's residents who could not be accounted for: 90-year-old John Semple, 71-year-old John Crofts, and 70-year-old Ralph Grant. Like other Laan residents, the missing men were marginalized and had been brought to Muskoka from homeless shelters in Toronto. These men's pension checks continued to be cashed, although they had not been seen on the Laan property or elsewhere. The Laans had failed to report that they were missing. This led police to uncover a pension check scam and charged David, Walter, Walter's wife Karen, Paul, and Catherine with defrauding the federal government of the benefit money it was providing Semple, Crofts, Grant, and other residents who had died or were missing. The charges against David and Karen were dropped, but Walter, Catherine, and Paul pled guilty. The Laans' retirement homes were shut down by the authorities. After serving conditional sentences, Walter, Paul, and Catherine moved away from Muskoka, as did David. No one in the family has ever provided a sworn statement to police or cooperated with the investigation. In 2001, Walter Laan told the Toronto Sun that police were trying to sink us for these missing people. He added the case was really a dead issue now. It is still unknown to this day what happened to the missing elderly people at Laan Farm. Bianca Piper was a 13-year-old girl who struggled with severe ADHD and bipolar disorder. She required daily medications to prevent disorientation and hallucinations. Her therapist suggested a technique to both Bianca and her mother that if she found herself struggling with her anger in certain situations, then her mother should drop her off a short distance from the house and let Bianca walk back by herself so she has time to deal with her own aggression. On the evening of March 10, 2005, Bianca had an argument with her mother about the dishes and suggested to be dropped off a further distance away from their house in Foley, Missouri, after finding success with the technique before. Her mother agreed and dropped her off at McIntosh Hill Road about a mile away around 6:15 p.m. Hours later, Bianca had still not come home, so her mother reported her missing at 8:20 p.m. At the time of her disappearance, Bianca was wearing a lime green blouse, a grey Adidas hooded sweatshirt, blue jeans, and white sneakers. She also had a flashlight in her possession. Although it was initially believed that Piper had simply gotten lost on her way back home, following an extensive search, authorities came to believe that she had been abducted. Piper's mother passed a polygraph test, as did her mother's boyfriend. Her biological father was also extensively interviewed. Nobody in Piper's family ever became a suspect in her disappearance. In 2007, a multi-jurisdictional task force was created to investigate Michael J. Devlin for a possible connection to Piper's disappearance, as well as those of other children between 1988 and 1991, after 2 missing teenagers, Sean Hornbeck and Ben Ownby, were discovered in Devlin's residence. Hornbeck and Ownby were abducted in 2002 and 2007. The task force was dissolved in October 2007. No evidence of Devlin's involvement in Piper's disappearance was discovered. On February 3, 2023, a septic tank near where Piper was last seen was drained. The Sheriff's Department of Lincoln County is working with Othram Labs, a forensic genealogy company, in an effort to solve Piper's case. The investigation into Piper's disappearance remains open, though it is now considered a cold case. That is all for this video. Don't forget to subscribe so you're notified on my next true crime case. Like the video if you really did like the video, and comment down below your thoughts on these cases, along with any others you'd like me to look into. It could be my next one.